Unlike the remarkable, familiar, great family names of Rothschild, Vanderbilt, or Rockefeller, it's understandable that when you hear the name Ephrussi, nothing comes to mind. Doesn't ring a bell. This afternoon, in recognition of Holocaust Remembrance Day, my dear friend and art lecturer Cindy Edelman and I will present Loss and Rescue, inspired by the 2010 memoir, The Hare with Amber Eyes. This book spans 140 years in the lives of the Ephrussis. It is a story of a forgotten dynasty rediscovered this afternoon.
Stacey and I are so happy to be back together here at the Kummer. We're really excited about today's presentation, and we thank the Kummer for their hospitality and friendship. We've been looking forward to presenting this story. Wrapped within the story book are three passions of ours. Of course, overarching is Holocaust remembrance, the love of art, and the love of literature. In fact, it's these three passions that really sparked our idea to create LiterArture in 2016 at Starbucks in San Marco, where we were bemoaning the lack of civil discourse in our community. Our series now has over 12 programs to date, and they all are exploring the endless ways, that the stories painted on canvas and written on the pages reveal universal truths and remind us that we have more in common than not. And we feel deeply that the arts, whether it's visual art or literature, inspire bridges of opportunity to really understand one another and find respectful common ground.
Literature is a Searching for Identity program. Searching for Identity produces public events, documentary films, writing workshops, panel discussions, and a wonderful book discussion online and at San Marco Books and More. I invite you to come. What we do is we capture history inspired by the written word. It has been over 2 years since literature has been here in person at the Kummer. And we are so happy, as Cindy said, to be here this afternoon. And where is the Kummer's Emily Moody?
Yes.
We want to thank Emily Moody. Okay, in case you don't know, we're a little high maintenance. So we are very yourself. So I want to thank Emily so much for making today's program possible. And I also want to take one moment to I want to extend a heartfelt welcome to Searching for Identity's very special guests. It is you who make programs like this possible, and I thank you.
Today we're going to take you back in time and inside the pages of The Hare with Amber Eyes, so you get a feel for Edmund de Waal's storytelling. The Hare with Amber Eyes is fashioned as a memoir style and told through woven narratives, and we're going to try to be as clear as possible. We had a talk last night, and I was so lucky that my husband was there, because we went home and he told me all the ways that we could improve our talk. And that includes providing a family tree of the Ephrussis, because both Stacey's going to talk about the book itself, which of course includes a lot of art. And we tried to separate it as best we can, but it might get a little confusing. So not only did he make the copies for me this morning, he circled the names that we're going to be talking about. So we love Dan.
Should we also say what he wanted more of?
No, we should not.
Okay, moving forward. Cindy, as our docent, will place us up close and personal with famous artists and their nascent careers as they evolved to the famous artists we know today. She'll shed light on their artwork and reveal deeper meaning and restore provenance to paintings we thought we knew so well. You will leave us this afternoon carrying the memory of one family's story rescued, and recognizing the millions and millions and millions of stories lost.
Excuse me one second. I forgot to mention, I'm the hyper one on time, and we recognize that some people have an hour. And so if you have to leave after an hour, please, we understand, but we may run over. And in other words, if you have something else to do, you will not be offending us if you have to leave early. But
and I'm the forgetful one because I was supposed to say that, and I forgot. Okay, so moving forward. Okay.
That's another thing Dan told me. I went on too long last night.
And I will be seeing my therapist after this. I'm just okay.
Oh, dear.
The Hare with Amber Eyes tells two stories. One is large, set in the context of history, recorded through the lens of one family's story. It is the story of an extraordinary, immensely successful Ephrussi family, whose fortune was made in wheat and banking. They were empowered by hard work, a strong business sense, dedicated philanthropic giving, artistic appreciation, a loyalty to country, a love of knowledge and culture. It is a family that has been hijacked and scarred with permanent loss. That's one grand family story. Now, on the other hand, the story concerns something very tiny, an object so tiny that you can lay it in the palm of your hand or slip it in your pocket. Feather light, yet packed with significance. We can come to you this afternoon with the Ephrussi family story because 264 of these miniature objects, carved out of wood and ivory, these escaped the Nazis' clutches. These pieces, called netsukes, unlike many pieces of art, are meant to be touched. And we're so very lucky because we have friends that have shared their netsukes with us today. And there's one
to pass them around.
Is that okay if we? Diane Sandler has brought one from her collection, and we have a few more, so we're going to go ahead and pass those. Thank you, Diane. Ooh. Wait, stop right. You are.
I forgot.
Okay. It takes a village. Please help us because, we're on this together. Okay, so that's one grand family story. The two images on the slide you see were taken at my hometown happy place. You may recognize this is the Toledo Museum of Art. The museum has a breathtaking netsuke collection. The image provides for you some perspective. On the right is the shadow of my sister walking by one of the many display cases, and on the left shows detail of one of the netsukes perched inside the middle shelf. But we're so fortunate that we have samples with us here today. Now, our author employs these tiny talismans to be our portals of exploration and guide through every chapter of the book. I admire this literary tool. It's elegant, but I am not surprised. Our author, Edmund de Waal, is also a wonderful ceramicist. Or I could say, Edmund de Waal, a world-famous ceramicist, is also an author. Is it a coincidence that he has spent 4 decades of his life with his hands immersed in clay and porcelain, creating beautiful pots and sculpture, both useful, artful, from single pots and bowls to entire sculptural groupings, inside and outside? And his artwork can be found across the globe. Right now, you can go to his most recent exhibition, connected in many ways to our book, at the Museum Nassim de Commando, pictured here. Or you could go to the Jewish Museum in New York right now and see an exhibition entitled The Hare with Amber Eyes, and it features some of the netsukes that we'll talk about this afternoon.
And it's up till May 15th.
And it's up till May 15th, so we got to hurry and catch a flight. Here is a breathtaking example. If you were to walk into the Victoria and Albert Museum in London and look up, you would see his Signs and Wonders installed in 2009. This is on permanent display in their galleries. Like the Japanese netsuke, he is fascinated between the relationship of objects, space, and human touch. De Waal was born in Nottingham, England. He is the son of the Reverend Dr. de Waal, Dean of the Canterbury Cathedral. The Dutch name originates with his father, Heinrich de Waal, a Dutch businessman who moved to England. Now, de Waal's grandmother was Elizabeth, and she was a member of the Ephrussi family. If you look at which is very helpful, and it's also at the beginning of the book, there is a family tree, thank goodness, and you can follow along. It is Edmund who ends up inheriting the 264 netsukes through this branch of the tree, through his grandmother. And he wants to know, obviously he's a ceramicist, who touched these? What are the stories behind these? How did they come to be made? It is this artist's fascination with tactile relationships that he finds fascinating. And he just happens to be a very talented writer. And so this serves as the basis to our story. The Ephrussi family were a great banking family that rise to successful heights, starting in Odessa and then moving to Paris and Vienna. And according to the book, he says, quote, they burned like a comet through the 19th century, through the Parisian and Venetian societies. They dined with prime ministers. They were assimilated, acculturated Jews. They were aristocrats, high society. To me, if I had a Time Turner necklace, to live in such a cultured, stellar life, oh my gosh. But of course I know this brilliance cannot last. The book goes into great detail. It tells about the history of the Ephrussis with an extensive family tree, as you have seen. But for now, this afternoon, step back with me for a moment so we can appreciate the good fortune of Edmund de Waal to have the knowledge and access to this family history dating back to his great-great-grandfather. And I can't emphasize this enough. I work with children of Holocaust survivors. They don't know names. They don't know dates. They don't know towns. They don't know births. This man knows names. You see them on this tree: Charles, Henri, Jules, Marie, Therese, Stéphane, Giselle, Constant. He knows the dates of births and deaths and marriages. They lived in Odessa, they lived in Paris, they lived in Tokyo. This is remarkable. He even knows addresses. This is 81 Rue de Monceau. I know this because I Googled it. Here is the palatial Hotel Ephrussi. This neighborhood in Paris, it radiates a certain kind of success. When built in 1871, it sent a message. We have arrived. We are the nouveau riche, as exactly Monceau implies. You'll recognize one of their neighbors. It's the Rothschilds. Their home in Vienna was literally a palace. This is the Palace Ephrussi on the Ringstrasse. Our author describes these homes as headquarters of a family and their ascendancy. Both homes, de Waal explains, quote, share a sense of drama. They are a public face to the world, unquote. These are people who are inventing themselves. They're competing with older parts of town. And de Waal, ever the artist, describes the family homes as a little stagey.
You think? Well, this one's now the casinos of Austria.
Well, he's British, so we do everything very understated, right? These surely are homes of the sparkling Erevistes. But back then, they had another term. It was called doing a Rothschild. Quote, just as the Rothschilds had sent their sons and daughters out from Frankfurt at the start of the 19th century to colonize European cities, so did the Abraham of our family. You'll see him at the top of the chart, Charles Joachim Ephrussi. He had a mastermind that expanded their tiny business beginning in the 1860s. All of the Ephrussi children, all of these children, were developed as financiers and married into suitable Jewish dynasties. And as a footnote, just to hit it home, Beatrice Ephrussi ends up marrying a Rothschild. Now that's another story with other palaces and lots of eggs and art, and you can uncover that reading the book. For a descendant of a Jewish family in Europe, for Edmund de Waal to discover this precious, detailed information, it is miraculous. And it also worries me. An ambient emotional erosion that plays in my head whenever I read a book connected to a Jewish experience. I love book covers. Call me Shala. Anyway, this jacket gives you an idea of what the Palace Ephrussi was like, because that golden image you see on the screen, we'll have a bigger shot later, is the ceiling in the ballroom in Vienna. Stay tuned. With great detail, the Hare with Amber Eyes shares the Ephrussi family's rise to prominence. On page 24, de Waal explains how Charles Joachim Ephrussi transformed this small grain trading business that by 1816 had become the greatest grain exporters in the world. This is Monsanto. This is DuPont. And led to a banking empire. Quote, he bought grain from the middlemen who transported it on carts along heavily rutted roads from the rich black soil, from Ukrainian wheat fields, the greatest wheat fields in the world, and from there to the port of Odessa, and then out from there across the Danube and across the Mediterranean. In Paris, James de Rothschild was known as Le Roi des Juifs, the King of the Jews, and the Ephrussis were seen as the Roi de Bleu, the King of Grain. They were Jews with their own coat of arms, an ear of corn and a heraldic boat with 3 masts at full sails, the motto, Quod Honestrum, unfurled below the ship. We are above reproach, it screams. You can trust us. King of the Jews, a coat of arms, a motto. Now, if I were reading Hilary Mantel or about a family who was not Jewish, this description, this would inspire me. I would want to know more about their coat of arms. I would relish in the history, the culture, the references, the symbols. I would want to know what they ate, who they slept with, etc. But honestly, this story of a successful family who is Jewish and acculturated, this bodes me with fear and pain for them then and for me right now. Because I know it is the knowledge of the hatred that darkens the most earnest of intents. So I hope you'll read the book. You can learn about 5 generations, and it could be a fairy tale, but of course it is not. Taking a cue from our netsukes, I'm now going to move forward for 2 generations and introduce you to their owner. And he is the family, which was the family patriarch. Born in Odessa in 1849, it is Charles Ephrussi, who is not cut out to be a banker, and Cindy will go into great detail on his glorious life. He is shunned from his place at the business table to study art.
He's not really shunned, he chooses.
I'm quoting.
Chooses
It's a
not
quote.
to. Okay.
The verb shunned. It's in.
But, okay, he chose not to go into the bank.
Okay, that's fine. This is open for debate.
Okay.
We all have our own interpretations of the book.
Okay.
De Waal makes us feel as if we are right alongside Charles as he establishes himself in the best Parisian salons and societies. And it is Charles who conquers this world with aplomb. And he begins collecting. He's a patron to up-and-coming artists that will make your jaw drop. And he has a lover, Louis Kahn d'Anvers. Okay, she's married. She's got 4 children. And her relationship with Charles, she ends up with a 5th child. You can guess his name, Charles. And it all sounds very French and very elegant and sophisticated and wonderful. But underneath the story of Charles, I worry of what's to come. But I read on. Now, as a book lover, I feel like Charles is almost like a flanneurial Forrest Gump of French society. He is showing up everywhere in all the right places. But what is jaw-dropping for me to learn is that he was the inspiration for Proust's Charles Swann in remembrance of things past. I'm going to repeat that for anyone who is a nerd like me, okay? He is an inspiration for the namesake on the first book of the series, Swann's Way, Charles Ephrussi. This floors me. How do I not know this? Why do we not know this? And maybe I'm the only person who doesn't know this. Maybe I didn't know he was a literary influencer way before we even made that into a word. But I want you to know that I suffered through 2.5 of Proust's opus. These don't look very thick, right? These are very thin pages. This is a 600-page book, like of maybe 10 sentences in total. Okay? I tried. I gave it my best. And I probably won't make it through all 6 as you see here. I understand there's a film of the first 2 and then even Hollywood gave up. But I understand the impact on literature. And so for me, I feel this should be common knowledge for everyone in this room. If I was a painter, this is the image I would make that captures my feelings for this book. And who is the artist?
Gustave Caillebotte.
That's a great name. For me, let's look at this man in the window. He is a metaphor. To me, this is Charles. He's on the outside. He's isolated. He is the Ephrussis. He is Jewish people's place in society. Why has Charles' influence on literature not merely been, as we would say today, canceled, but I would say liquidated? I know the answer. It's part of a larger pattern that is repeated through history of hatred, of bigotry. And remember, the winners get to write the history. And I know why he's a ghost. And I only have to read to page 39 to justify it. It's exposed right there. It's the beginning of chapter 3. We are introduced to the ascetic novelist, diarist, and collector, Edmund de Waal. May sound familiar to you. His thoughts are recorded in a journal, and he writes with umbrage that people such as Charles were invited to salons at all. It disgusted him. Quote, "The salons have become infested with Jews and Jewesses," unquote. And he was not alone in his contempt. De Waal shares that Charles Ephrussi was called a malève, which means badly brought up, and an insupportable, insufferable. Goncourt explains that Charles does not know his place. Quote, "He doesn't know how to shade his eagerness or become invisible," unquote. Goncourt's voice is not alone. We are in the era of the Dreyfus affair. Dreyfus, a French Jewish military officer who was wrongly tried 3 times in France. The trial and the events that followed he was accused of treason. These came to be known as the Dreyfus Affair. I'll never be able to pick that up. It's 100 feet below me. Okay, don't worry about it. The trial and events that followed can be documented anywhere. You can go to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website. They say it is one of the significant political events in French history through the 19th and 20th centuries. Why? Even though he was exonerated, the trial, public outcry have repercussions that influence politics in France for decades to come, I would say, all over the world today. So sadly, in a home that promoted liberté, égalité, and fraternité, there was hatred too. Eventually, the Dreyfus Affair contributes to several laws about separation of church and state, but it doesn't change bigotry. And the Jews in France and around the world at the time, they were actually shocked that an acculturated Jew like Alfred Dreyfus, who demonstrates his loyalty to the state, he served in the military, why couldn't he get a fair trial? Jewish hatred. I don't even call it anti-Semitism. That's too soft and fluffy. People hate Jews. And Jewish hatred is viral. For the weak and narrow-minded, it's intoxicating. It makes you feel powerful, to dehumanize. Jewish hate coats the rues, the parks, the cafes, and the boating parties in France. Time and time again throughout this book, de Waal juxtaposed what should be an amazing Horatio Alger story of rags to riches to, in tandem, growing hatred at the exact same time. Although today the Ephrussi family's existence, it's pretty much evaporated, you can, if you're a French writer, be awarded one of the most prestigious national French awards. It's called the Prix Goncourt. It was founded by the bigot Edmund Goncourt. So for me, a reader in 2022, I know it is impossible for the Ephrussi family to thrive or ever really be considered part of French society. But Charles doesn't know this. In fact, he's caught up right now in a craze called Japonisme. Japonisme, thank you. So we're in Paris in 1870, and this is where we first meet the netsukes. De Waal introduces us to them in chapter 6 with a whole inventory. The fox with inlaid eyes made of wood, a sleeping servant, children playing with puppies, etc. Over 200. And he buys the entire collection. And so it goes, the Hare with amber eyes. We follow a family story, and the author is so clever because he uses the netsukes for us to travel chronologically. And these netsukes, they evolve in meaning, in time, and in inheritance. De Waal expertly inserts the darkening hatred, rearing its ugly head. It spreads wider and wider, decade by decade, throughout the novel. So next, the Netsuke collection and the display case, a glass vitrine, is reborn as a wedding gift. It is $18.99, and Charles gives the collection to, you need to look at your little map, the Baron Victor Ephrussi and his new bride, Emmy Shea von Koromla. These are Edmund's great-grandparents. The Baron Victor and Baroness Emmy live in that Palace of Ephrussi on Vienna's famed Ringstrasse, a jewel in the city's crown, a boulevard to show off the glory of the Habsburgs' empire. In this same year of their marriage, it was possible for someone to stand up in the Reichstag, that'd be like stand up in the well of the House of Representatives, and make speeches calling for Schutzgelder, which means bounties for shooting Jews. Now, Vienna's Jewish hatred, de Waal explains, was different from the Parisian Jewish hatred. In both places, it did happen overtly and covertly. However, if Paris seethed Jewish hatred, Vienna spasmed it. In Vienna, you could expect to have your hat knocked off your head while walking down the Ringstrasse for looking Jewish. This happened to Freud's father. You could be accused of being a dirty Jew on a train if you opened a window in the carriage. This actually happened to Sigmund Freud. You could be snubbed at a meeting for being a Jew. You could be evicted from a university lecture by cries of Udenhaus, Jews out, until you and every last Jewish student would have to pick up your books and leave. So how did these assimilated Jews react? According to de Waal, quote, "It was probably best not to make too much of a fuss," unquote. Reading these passages, I'm exasperated. And even our author is. He says, quote, "It looks like I'm going to spend another winter reading about anti-Semitism," unquote. The Ephrussi family is indeed fascinating, and as are the Vienna chapters. With de Waal's precise writing style, we experience 19th century high society, and we get to go intimate into Emmy and Victor's marriage. And when de Waal surely can't know the conversations between his grandparents, it is his expert writing that brings such life to this book. The incredible wealth of the Ephrussi family is described with awe by our author. So now the Netskes are living in the Palace of Ephrussi, although they are relegated to Emmy's dressing room. De Waal surmises that neither Victor nor Emmy really knew what to do with this wedding gift of this huge vitrine with these little wooden things in it. And it certainly did not match their decor. Let's take a look at Emmy. Meet the Baron Emmy Ephrussi. In this photograph, she is in her walking costume. I was so in love when I read this paragraph that this picture that you see is me. Okay, first of all, and Desiree knows this, I don't like hardbacks because I can't write in them, I can't manipulate them. But this was a hardback. I paid retail. I bought the hardback. I wasn't going to wait for the one I could tear up. I had to write "wow" because I was so impressed with these words. He explains in great detail how the Baroness has to dress up for taking a walk on the Ringstrasse. This takes time. This takes effort. This is like a major event. I am so in awe of this, as you can plainly see. I can't believe this. This is real life. And then 2 pages later, she's dressed as Marie Antoinette for like a party. And then she's dressed in this beautiful costume based on, Cindy, please help me out here.
Isabella d'Este by Titian, and the actual painting is in the art museum in Vienna. And, really.
I mean, I want that life.
Is that no, don't.
Well, you know what I mean. Anyway.
Do you want a walking costume?
Yes, I want to walk. I want the whole thing. Okay, anyway.
She didn't have Netflix.
She did not have Netflix. This is very true. But she probably had Masterpiece, right? Okay. Anyway, I'm going off base here. So I'm so
fine.
sorry.
It's fine.
Okay. All right. So anyway, yes. So I mean, yeah, I ate it up clearly. So de Waal employs the term Potemkin, describing this opulence, the ballrooms that you saw, the entire lifestyle, and its fragility. Seriously, it's haunting. History dictates, and we know as we read this book, that this Vanderbilt existence cannot go on much longer. But we as readers, we have a luxury. We can put all of that on pause. And so we can place ourselves in the Baroness's beautiful, I'm sure luxurious dressing room. It is a place of refuge, of preparation. And where is Victor? He is secluded in his library, happily all alone. The mansion holds endless beautiful rooms. They have a staff and a livery that is expected of royalty. It is the finest of everything. Yes, it is the intimacy, though. It is the heart of the little dressing room where we will find the heart of the family. It is the Ephrussis' 4 children. First, we see Elizabeth. Now, at 3 years old in this photo, we see her peeking out of a train carriage of the Orient Express. Then she will grow up. We will see her on the right. This is a young woman who has defied odds, bigotry, sexism. She's fought for a quality education, and I envy her future lifelong friendship that she will have with Renee Marie Rilke.
Wasn't she the first woman to graduate law from the university in
Oh,
Vienna?
yeah. I mean, just an amazing woman. But for now, I want you to picture her and her siblings, Gisela, Rudolph, and Iki, deep inside this grand palais somewhere. They're all sitting on the floor and they're watching this ritual. Their mother, she is changing her clothes. She's getting ready to go out for the evening. It could be a ball, a party, the opera, who knows? But the children sit on the floor, and this is the time where they're allowed to open the cabinet and take out these tiny, small little objects and play with them. It's so intimate. It's a precious memory, and it is the only alone time they will remember with their mother. But wait. There is another person running around the dressing room, back and forth from the closets, and she must be mentioned. I want you to notice the maid. Her name's Anna. She's attending to Emmy. We're never going to know her last name. But she's helping the Baroness dress for the evening. This is a perfect, precious family tableau. I am at once enamored. I'm transported back in time with this fairy tale existence, and yet I am mortified at what is to come. We know the children grow up. We know they find refuge. They settle in New York, in England, in Mexico, and in Tokyo. But we're going to travel now to 1938. Following Austria's annexation to Nazi Germany, we enter the Anschluss. We see Hitler parading down the same Ringstrasse where Emmy took her walks in her walking costume. Now the Gestapo invade the palace of Ephrussi. Within a matter of weeks, the Baron, Baroness, and son Rudolph are restricted to 2 rooms. Victor and Rudolph are arrested. They are threatened to be sent to Dachau. How do they escape? On one condition. Now the 78-year-old Victor Ephrussi has to sign away everything. Home ownership, the contents of the home, the artwork, his beloved library. He must give up all their property, every piece of furniture, every tablecloth. Then the Nazis eviscerate the palace of Ephrussi. They rape it. They crate it up. The artwork, the library books, the furniture, literally everything. And within weeks, the family is severed of every possession. The palace of Ephrussi is stolen, and then it is transformed and soiled into a propaganda headquarters from where the Nazis will issue racist doctrines and distribute them throughout Austria. While the Ephrussi home has become part of the Nazi propaganda machine, no one is paying attention to the maid. She's invisible. So it is Anna who will slowly pass by the vitrine in the dressing room every so often. She's going to open the glass doors. She's going to take a netsuke and slip it into her apron pocket. She'll go home at night, tuck it underneath her bed. Then another one, and then another. She's smuggling miniature evidence of an extinguished existence. The book then shares the netsuke's matriculation of home and meaning when we don't find them for 30 years. After the war ends, Elizabeth returns to the Ringstrasse and the Palais. She talks to Anna. She sees everything is gone. Anna says, "I have something for you." And she comes back with every one of the original collection, 264 netsukes. We don't know Anna's last name. She's just a servant. Edmund de Waal is a guy who began creating pots when he was 5. And he has identified as a ceramicist ever since then. He puts off Cambridge for 2 years to take up an apprenticeship with the renowned potter, Geoffrey Whiting. And during this apprenticeship, this man makes hundreds of pots, repetitively making them. He compares it to practicing scales as if you were a musician. He then goes to Cambridge, graduates with honors, and I don't know how his parents felt about it, but he ends up returning to the pots. And then he begins to work with porcelain. Now, porcelain is very delicate, elusive, kind of a diva, and it's also translucent, kind of like watercolor. And this is a great description for his writing style. You kind of got to grab hold of it. So I want you to fast forward with me to 1991. Now we are with Edmund, doing his post-grad work, studying Japanese with the famous potter Bernard Leach, and this takes him to Tokyo. And he has family there. So naturally, he was raised well, so he goes and pays a call to his Uncle Iggy, Elizabeth's brother. And it is in Uncle Iggy's home in Tokyo that Edmund de Waal sees a glass cabinet. And it's filled with these very tiny carved wooden objects and ivory objects. So we get to see in the book the 5th generation of Ephrussi, the artist of touch, take out a netsuke and hold in his hand the Hare with amber eyes. Cindy.
I mean, I may have the vapors having to follow Stacey Goldring again. Imagine being targeted as a nomadic, money-grubbing Jew, or one who had been vomited from all the ghettos of Europe, or a Jew who was, quote, installed as the master of historic houses, or being railed against hunting. I didn't really know Jews were hunters, but okay. The Jew on horseback who hunts should be hunted, end quote. Or being the object of Edmund de Goncourt. Stacey's already quoted Edmund, there's more. He especially loathed Charles Ephrussi because in the 1870s, Charles had become the chosen companion, are you ready, for Napoleon's niece. Goncourt called Charles Ephrussi a mahout. A mahout, in case you don't know, and I didn't, was a person who works with, rides, and trains elephants and tends to them. And he called him a mahout to guide the aged princess through life. I think that says a lot about a young man in his 20s. I'm setting the stage here for what Stacey has already described, the eventual tragedy that befell all the great Jewish families in France. Because for all the assimilating, for the love of everything French, including the Grand Palais, the historic collections, the contribution to French art and culture, including supporting and elevating the Impressionists. We'll get to that soon. And for their patriotism, even losing children during World War I, like the Commando family did, and then converting to the state religion of Catholicism. The wealthiest Jews could never conquer their Jewishness, never. So how did Charles Ephrussi, the third son of the Paris branch of the prominent Russian Jewish Ephrussis, the one who didn't have to go into banking, maybe he was shunned because he didn't have a monetary path in his, or monetary sensibility or intellect, become the protagonist of our story. Because this is a story of great wealth, a story of art and cultural significance, a story of collecting, a story of migration, a story of displacement, of stolen property, a story of survival, and ultimately, I believe this with great sincerity, it was a story of unrequited love. You know, you just couldn't ever get to that elevation in society. It's a uniquely 19th century Jewish story. So here's what we know about, oh, he's so handsome, Charles. You're looking at a posthumous portrait of Charles, who, as Stacey shared, he was born in Odessa. He moved to Vienna when he was 10 with his family, and then he moved to Paris when he was 21, a polymath. He learned Latin, Greek, English, and German, and he spoke French, Russian, and Yiddish. Phew. Why, you might wonder? It was important for Jews to know languages since it was, quote, a denominator of class. Among his talents, this handsome, debonair gentleman was a skilled fencer, dancer, and conversationalist. You know how the New York Times on Sundays in their book review, they interview a famous author and they say, well, who would you like to invite to dinner? I would like to have dinner and know Charles Ephrussi, because above all, he was a passionate art enthusiast. He was a prolific, eclectic collector, we're going to see in a minute. He was one who helped the Impressionists become respected because he wrote so many positive reviews about them in his publication. And he offered other means of support, which I'll share shortly. He was a regular attendee of salons. I always wanted to have a salon. I think we should have a salon.
Oh, I'm all for it.
He was an opera lover, and who knew? He even loved pets. He named his dog Carmen. Now, notice he's wearing a red lapel pin on his jacket, and that signifies that he received a Legion of Honor by the French government for his cultural services. But what we must never forget is that he operates within the context of a very damning French society that hated their Jews, especially those like him. From the 1880s, during the financial scandals, to 1886, when the horror of a person, Edward Drummond, wrote a screed called Jewish France, which was published in 1886, to the 12-year-long Dreyfus Affair beginning in 1894. Paris, in particular, was a very uncomfortable place for families like the Ephrussis. This is Stacey's favorite painting, so I had to put it in. So this is Le Pont de l'Europe by Gustave Caillebotte, 1876. When I taught AP Art History, I loved saying the name Caillebotte. You know, I just wanted the students to be able to say it properly. The artist, Caillebotte, was a member of the Impressionist circle. He was a major patron because he came from wealth, and he was a friend of Charles Ephrussi. And here we see modern industrial Paris, this new bridge that was made of steel girders, and we see numerous classes walking or resting on the bridge. And we also see this well-dressed couple, and the gentleman represents this new term for 19th century France, The term you probably know is called flaneur, meaning a stroller or a loafer. And it was used by the poet Charles Baudelaire to identify someone who was an observer of modern urban life, flaneur. Or it could refer to a man about town. And that would be much like Charles Ephrussi. And just as an aside, because it will come into play in a few minutes, Baudelaire was someone who encouraged the Impressionists to paint modern life. Now, we also learned that Charles visited like multiple salons daily. One critic said he went to as many as 6 to 7 salons a day, and that does seem a bit excessive, but he was a man about town. Next. So at 22, 1 year after he moved into his home, he decided to take a gap year. Not like a gap year like we all think of a gap year. Charles took a gap year to Italy for some serious shopping. Indeed, he found a Medici bed in Florence fit for a prince that he quickly edited, replacing the monogram M with an E. He bought medallions, including the bronze seen in the middle of the slide, and it's a profile of another great art history name, Sigismondo Malatesta. And he was the Lord of Rimini, a condottiere, which meant he led mercenary soldiers, and he was quite a soldier himself. And oddly enough, his name in Italian means headache. Malatesta means headache. And surely if you had been one of his numerous wives, or even more mistresses than wives, you would have thought how appropriate. Charles gave the medallion of Sigismondo Malatesta to the Louvre. And he also purchased, during his gap year, he purchased 16th century tapestries after Raphael, and a marble child, a sculpture after Donatello, and multiple drawings. I hope you're getting the picture, no pun intended, that he was quite knowledgeable and he had plenty of means to pursue his passions. He also found an 18th century clock on the right in the slide. It's not Italian, it's French. It's called a planisphere, but please don't ask me to explain it except because I'm not a science person. It charts the heavens, and that's about as much as we're going to go there. In addition, Charles bought a 17th century golden silk Savonnière carpet. This was made for the Grand Gallery at the Louvre. Can you imagine? They had to cut it down, so this is the part of it that he purchased. The subject of it is an allegory of air, and I hope you can see the four winds with their big cheeks as they're blowing air out of these trumpets. Interestingly, this carpet, because Charles Ephrussi died in 1905 of mysterious circumstances, we won't mention that there was a lot of syphilis going around Paris at the time, but we really don't know what happened to him. But his neighbors at 83 Rue de Monceau, the Commando family, ended up either being given this rug or buying this rug, it's unclear, but the Commando home is now this jewel of a museum that I've never been to, but it's named the Nissan Commando because it was named for the owner's son who perished during World War I. But we will talk about the Commandos in a second. Now, Charles was also an art historian, and he wasn't just a dilettante art historian. He was a serious art historian, very well respected. He had seen some Dürer images in the family home in Vienna, and so he decided to write a book on Dürer drawings. Albert Dürer was a great German 15th century Renaissance artist, and he certainly had a very healthy ego because the image on that page on the left from the book shows Dürer as presenting himself as Jesus Christ. You know, talk about a healthy ego. Okay. And Charles also worked with the Louvre, with curators a great deal. For example, he arranged for and bought with his own funds, a Botticelli fresco from Florence that remains at the Louvre to this day, as well as toiling as a writer for different French periodicals, Charles, and that included the Gazette de Beaux-Arts, which he worked at from the age of 28 until his untimely death at 55. He wrote, edited, and was part owner of the Gazette de Beaux-Arts. Whereas his first collection was more conventional, he began collecting Japanese art in the 1870s, thanks to the craze for all things Japanese or Japanisme, which deluged France after Commodore Perry, our wonderful Commodore Matthew Perry, who opened up Tokyo in 1853 to 1854. So what's all the fuss about, you might ask? Well, at the time in Western Europe and in Western art, the artists were looking for alternatives to the traditional academic rules. They wanted things to, they wanted their art to reflect the times, and at the times they were changing. So Japanese art featured characteristics such as asymmetrical compositions, flattened perspective, unusual points of view like bird's eye view, crop designs. We could also say the camera which was invented around 1832, also influenced crop designs, but so did Japanese prints. Strong diagonals, flat, bold colors, and here's one that it's so strikingly true, the informal glimpses of contemporary life. So that just really spoke to Impressionists. So on the left, we'll buzz through these because I realize I'm the one who's hyper about people's time. On the left is Monet's portrait of his wife Camille. She's twirling around in an embroidered red robe, which includes a samurai unsheathing a sword as a decoration on the robe. She's dancing on a traditional Japanese floor covering called a tatami mat. She's wearing a blonde wig. I'm not sure about the blonde wig. And she holds a fan with the colors of the French flag. And there are many other fans in the painting. Some are on the wall, some have dropped to the floor. And considered provocative by the critics of the time, some described her as, quote, a great doll with nothing human about her face. That's for you all. You can decide yourselves if you agree. And then the other work on the right is, I took some, shall we say, personal liberty here, because I really think Edward Manet happens to be such an incredible painter. And this is Edward Manet's portrait of his friend Émile Zola, the great writer, art critic, and defender of Dreyfus. Zola, who looks as though we've walked into his study and we've caught him by surprise. We perceive him sitting in profile. He's not completely in profile. He's got the flattest face, and he's stiff as an Assyrian ruler holding a book. He's posed against this gold Japanese screen with a beautiful bird. Last night I said tweeter, but I didn't think it went over too well. And a Japanese woodblock print on the wall. So you've got these images, you've got art, you've got the portrait of Zola, but you've got all these other things, like you have a Velázquez print of a very famous painting that Manet loved called The Drinkers, and Manet's favorite painting of Olympia. And Olympia was his refuting of the traditional Venus, reclining Venus figures. Yes, there were some that were Venetian. Anyway, you also see an Asian porcelain inkwell, which holds a quill, indicating that the novelist is getting ready to write. So in a sense, the objects in this work become maybe even more important than the man himself. Okay, thank you. Now we've met the woman in the gorgeous pastel. Previously, she is Louise Kahn d'Anvers, wife of Louis, who's also an incredibly wealthy banker.
And Cindy, don't we have a connection to Louis?
We do. Courtney Wilson's father met the great-grandson of Louis? Grandson of Louis in what, business school or law school?
Harvard Business.
Harvard Business School, and she's graciously brought photos, and she has a lot to share with us, so please don't be in a rush. Anyway, Louise was a cultural catalyst and a music and poetry aficionado. One of her closest friends was Fanny Ephrussi, who was Charles Ephrussis' cousin, which guaranteed that Louise and Charles's social paths would cross, and cross they did, constantly at receptions, at balls, even they holidayed even together. So she was a few years older than Charles, and Louise enters his life as he begins to collect Japanese art. And Edmund de Waal, the author of our book, dates Charles's interest in collecting and in sex to Louise. Even the foul Goncourt spies them at art dealer Seychelles, where they go to scope out Japanese art and each other. And apparently they did more than scoping or more than looking at the art at the dealers. Who knew you could do that kind of thing? Goncourt, though, we always have to kind of balance the funny with the sad truth. Goncourt describes Seychelles as, quote, the place where Jewish money comes, end quote. And he encountered Louise and Charles sharing stolen moments at Seychelles. But from what we know about Louise, Charles was not her first nor her last conquest. And initially they bought 33 black and gold lacquer boxes, even some owned by, are you ready, Marie Antoinette. And they're similar to the one you see on the screen that's not exactly the same. They also purchased Japanese stoneware, Japanese bronzes, and of course the 264 netsukes. Now, a word about the netsukes, and I'm going to try to be as clear as possible. The netsukes are, as we said, as Stacey said, they're small sculptures, but you could also think about them as a toggle. And they developed out of convenience because in Japanese society during the 17th to the 19th century, which was called the Edo period in Japanese art, the women who wore kimono had pockets in their kimono, and they had sleeves that you could stick, you could roll your sleeve up and stick something in your sleeve. Men did not have pockets, nor were their sleeves fashioned the same way. So women and men tied their kimonos with a sash, and the sash is called an obi. I bet you knew that because guess what? It's always in crossword puzzles, the word obi, obi. So you see in the slide, you've got the obi, and in order for men to carry either medicines or money or tobacco, whatever it was, they had these stacked round boxes that were called in-row. Those are called in-row, right? Yes, those are called in-row. So the netsukes were what connected to the in-row on the obi. Now, is that clear? Because that was something Dan told me I needed to improve on. All right. Now, the materials, as Stacey shared, included wood, but also ivory, and especially hardwoods, animal horn, such as buffalo horn, and then in the Hare with Amber Eyes, which we'll look at momentarily, it has amber for the eye. And this is just a little practical netsuke 101. They had to be small. They had to have holes to which to pass a single cord, and they couldn't be bulky. They couldn't protrude, because that wouldn't work. So there you had it. Now, the other thing I would like to just mention is that Edmund de Waal doesn't know the provenance of the netsukes, all of the netsukes. I mean, 264, that's a lot of little sculptures, right? And they can date some of them that were carved probably before 1854. But I just want, before we actually talk about them, I just want you to remember that these objects were very sensual to the touch, and they invited the viewer to admire their shapes, and in particular their textures, and of course their material beauty. And the other thing I think is worth mentioning too is he says that these are the first things that have any connections to everyday life. even an exotic everyday life. And they weren't princely, but they were for touching, they were for laughing, they were for admiring. Now, Charles bought a black vitrine in polished wood. This is not his vitrine, because the original vitrine was actually shipped to Vienna, so it's probably a victim of World War II. But the vitrine has been described as being over 6 feet tall, which is really, that's tall, of course, from someone who's not very tall. That 6 feet tall is very tall. Okay, so it had a glass door in the front, and it had glass panels on either side, and a mirror in the back. Well, of course, you've probably learned this from ever having lived in a small space. Mirrors help spaces expand. And there was, as befitting these small sculptures, they were placed on green velvet. And so this slide shows you an example. And then the vitrine was, according to de Waal, the vitrine was part of this performance of salon life. It wasn't just part of the furnishings. This was where Charles would bring friends to see his art. You'd had 3 levels of Impressionist paintings lined up, all his Italian objects, and then of course the vitrine with these netsukes. And so it resided in his study. So we're just going to look at a few netsuke. We're going to flip through them. I do want to mention that the Hare with Amber Eyes, we do know the artist. His name was Masatoshi from Osaka, and it's signed and dated 1880. And it's just got the most adorable little paws. They're raised. His ears are tucked back, and he's very vigilant. He's ever alert, this little Hare. You can see why he was so endearing, such an endearing object to de Waal. And then we have, this is Stacey's favorite.
It is not I didn't even want to put it. Wait a minute. There are so many cute animal ones. Cindy picked. I'm sorry.
You said you were going to help me with this.
No, but I'm an honest person. No, okay. The octopus is an animal, but come on. Next.
Okay, well. Okay, we have tortoises, we have a little man cleaning a temple, and there's a rat on his back. Well, really, you said you would help me. Okay, then keep going then.
I'm helping.
Okay. According to de Waal, Charles collected some 40 Impressionist paintings, and don't worry, we're not looking at 40, in 3 years, when the Impressionists were considered charlatans. And why did he do that? Why did he like them? Well, they were radical in their subject matter and radical in their technique. Of course, now we don't think we would all love to have an Impressionist painting, right? And we're looking at the very first Impressionist work that Charles bought. It's a pastel, which means it's a work on paper by a woman Impressionist, which was really shocking to me that he would first go with someone like Berthe Morisot. And here we see this loving mother in black. The black, it's probably had to do with her connection to Manet, Morisot's connection to Manet. A loving mother in black at leisure. She's sitting in the tall grasses. Her graceful head tilts down toward her reclining toddler, whom she awkwardly holds. It looks like her lap has been made into a slide, and the child is down at the bottom. I don't know how that child is resting comfortably, but the child's right foot extends toward a small and hopefully good-natured dog, and a butterfly net is strewn in the grass diagonally. Why anyone want to sit in grass that big? I said that to Stacey, and she gave me a tongue lash. And then you have a young girl holding a straw hat, presuming that's the mother's child, but you wonder why she's sort of separated. Maybe she's in timeout, I don't know. But behind her and to the right is a bright aqua bench. And so this work would have been what would be called plein air. That is, she sketched it out of doors. It was drawn quickly, and with these slashing strokes, that it combines to form this energetic scene of maternal love and beauty. Although, again, that child looks hugely uncomfortable. Now, Berthe Morisot, the artist of this work that was in Charles's collection, along with Mary Cassatt, were the two women who exhibited with the Impressionists. And it wasn't an easy time being a woman. When is it ever an easy time being a woman? Especially as an artist, they couldn't attend the French Academy or any of the traditional studios where they would normally go to perfect their skills. Heaven forbid they should see a naked or nude man. And as you would imagine, their subject matter was limited to their daily life. However, they managed to, paint subject matter, exquisitely beautiful paintings or pastels and watercolors of everything from mothers and children, scenes at the opera, women trying on hats and gardens, and on and on. And Charles Ephrussi wrote about Morisot, about one of his paintings, which I couldn't show because it's just too much to talk about, that, quote, "She loves painting that is joyous and lively. She grinds flower petals onto her palette in order to scatter them on her canvas with light and witty touches." And just as an aside, because there are inquiring minds here, I know, she was married to Manet's brother. Apparently it was a marriage of convenience, but that's for another time. Okay, the next couple of paintings are by Claude Monet. I've already talked about one. These next two paintings are in were in Charles Ephrussy's private collection. I think we're going to just quickly go through them and go to the small Monet. This was also in Charles's collection. Manet. Ooh, I didn't mean to say Monet, Manet. This is a small painting. It's about 18 by 22 inches and painted at almost 3 years before Manet died when he was in his early 50s. And Charles had commissioned him, and he paints for Charles this bunch of white asparagus, which of course white asparagus, those are quite considered a delicacy. They have purple tips, and they're held together with two very thin willow rods, and that's how you would have encountered them if you had found them at the local market. And they sit on a base of green leaves. And you can see how thickly he applies the paint, giving this impression, if you will, of spontaneity. Scholars have determined that the colors of the painting were painted wet on wet, indicating that he created this work in a single working session. And it was commissioned, as I said, by Charles, and the agreed price was 800 francs. However, when Manet brought the painting to Charles, Charles being the generous and, he could afford to be generous and young man, he gave Manet 1,000 francs. And a week later, the following image appeared at his home saying, quote, "This one seems to have slipped from the bundle." It's such a wonderful tale. And I'm wondering if I should just go right to the Renoirs. What do you think?
Go right to the Renoirs.
Okay. I do want to, this is another one of Charles's works, and we can talk about it maybe afterwards if people...
It has a lot of Japanese influence.
Yes, and I did want to say that Degas, like Renoir, was one of the many artists that Charles admired. He developed friendships with those he collected, including Degas. He took Degas out to dinner multiple times. He got him a subscription to the opera and so forth. But it's a shame that Degas did not return the goodwill. In fact, he was a known anti-Semite, particularly around the time of the Dreyfus affair. He characterized Jews as belonging to that, quote, terrible race, end quote. Degas was so prejudiced that he once threw a model out when she was posing for him because she made some sympathetic remark about Dreyfus, and he thought she was Jewish and he kicked her out. She wasn't. And then he ended his many relationships with his Jewish friends, including Charles Ephrussi, who stopped speaking to him. And sadly, he scorned Pizarro, one with whom he had previously worked and praised. Now, and it's such a beautiful picture. The final three images are not in Charles's collection, but they wouldn't have been made without Charles Ephrussy's social capital. We're ready to examine Renoir and Charles's unusual friendship. And this is really so important to understanding Charles. Charles, as we've seen, was an early and significant collector of basically almost all of the Impressionists. He knew them, he befriended them. Sometimes he helped them determine which of their paintings that should be shown at the Paris Salon. And that's where artists would go to get recognized, find patrons, and so on, and socialize. And he even sometimes helped them hang their paintings at the salon. He introduced them to many influential people, including a lot of people in his family. And he even sent 12 of his Impressionist paintings to Germany. He had a cousin in Germany, Charles Ephrussi did, named Bernstein. And the Bernsteins introduced the major progressive German artists at the time to these 12 Impressionist paintings, and they were very influential. So Renoir's career in particular was impacted by Charles's connections. But Renoir was also a notorious anti-Semite, accepting commissions from wealthy Jews, at the same time mocking them in his correspondence. Calling one of Charles's non-Impressionist paintings Jew art, and we're looking at the fruits of their friendship with a portrait of Louise, the Louise of Louise and Charles, Louise Kahn d'Anvers' 8-year-old daughter Irene. And this is such an incredibly beautiful painting. Irene was the oldest of Louise's 3 daughters, and she bears the most demure expression through her beautiful presence here. Notice the skin is soft, her cheeks are rosy, and her lips are rosy, the tilt of her perfect head, and the mantle of her reddish golden hair, whose warmth really encircles her body. She's bathed in a dress of soft colors of baby blue and white lace. She is sweet as a Lauderie Macron, I'm not kidding, posed against nature's profusion of green, and she personifies innocence. When presented with the finished portrait, her father, Louis, the great banker, for some unknown reasons, sent it. He was so unhappy with it, he sent it to the servants' quarters, and he delayed paying Renoir, and that didn't go over very well. The painting was eventually bought by the Commando family. Irene joined the Commando family at the age of 19, marrying Moise Commando. He was a Turkish-born. He used to dress like a pasha. He was also extraordinarily wealthy. He'd lost one of his eyes. He was kind of, we would call him bulky. I wouldn't say he was large and kind of chunky. And he was 31, she was 19. Sadly, after a few years of unhappiness and 2 children later, she fell in love with the head of his stables. But he was a count, so there you go. This time this fellow was Italian, and he became her second husband, as well as she converted to Catholicism. It's so fascinating. Irene was not pursued during the Holocaust because she had converted. Not only it didn't matter if you converted, but she had an Italian passport because of her husband. So she didn't, and she had his name, which was an Italian name. What's fascinating about the painting is that it was stolen by Hermann Goering. He used to come to Paris on his own private train when he raped the Louvre, the Musée d'Orsay, the Jeu de Paume, and every major Jewish art gallery and Jewish art collection in Paris. So he would come, and his wife had a fancy for Renoir, so this painting was sent on a private train to Berlin to enter his personal collection, and was eventually traded, interestingly, for an Italian tondo, a round painting, a religious painting, but it found its way, it was returned to Paris, and it was exhibited as one of the French masterpieces that was found in Germany after World War II. Ultimately landing, are you ready? It's in Switzerland in a collection of an industrialist who sold arms to the Nazis. Oh. I know, it's like sickening. And this painting is another painting by Renoir of Irene's 2 younger sisters, Alice, on the left, and Elizabeth on the right, at 5 and 7. Elizabeth also converted to Catholicism, but she wasn't so lucky as her sister. She was sent to Auschwitz, is where she perished. But you get the sense of the Renoir, his incredibly beautiful brushwork. It's so feathery. You know, you really, it's pretty inimitable that you are able to recognize his artworks pretty quickly. These don't look to me like LiterArture. These more look like, and I do love Public's birthday cakes, but these look like, you know, Public's these dresses, and the misery that these young girls seem to be in. One of them, Elizabeth, is like pinching her dress. The dress looks so scratchy. And this painting was called impossibly saccharine by the critics. Impossibly saccharine. So here we are at our final work. You've made it. Congratulations. And this is, many people consider this work Renoir's finest. This is the Luncheon of the Boating Party, 1880 to 1881. And here's Renoir on the Jews. Great guy that he was. Quote, "They come to France to make money, but the moment a fight is on, they hide behind the first tree. There's so many in the army because Jews like to parade around in fancy uniforms," end quote. So further, Renoir deeply resented his dependence on Jewish elites. So let's just quickly, we'll talk about this work because some of you know the story about how this work connects to the Ephrussis, but some of you don't, so I'm going to share that with you momentarily. But the painting combines the three types of works of art. It's a group portrait. It's also there's a beautiful still life on the table, and then of course beyond the waving awning, the red and white awning, is a landscape. So it's very unusual that you have a painting that combines three different types of scenes like this. And it's the still life masterpiece. It's full of eating fruit and drinking lots of wine. The group portrait is a portrait of Renoir's friends. Everybody can be identified by name in the painting. And then of course there's even a landscape through the greenery in this tour de force. So compared to earlier works, the figures are much more three-dimensional. We sense the mass in their bodies. And like one of the earlier Monets that I showed, Renoir paints a scene of leisure that includes multiple classes of people, from the owner's children. So these people have stopped. They've been boating on the River Seine. They've stopped to have a nice lunch and a little bit of wine. And the two that are standing up with the same hat on are the children of the owner of the restaurant, the Fournays. And then you have Renoir's future wife, Aileen, who's the beautiful woman in the foreground. She's like getting ready to, give a smooch to her dog. She looks the best. Well, she better be, right? Because she's going to marry Renoir, so I guess he wants to impress her. And then you have the artist, Caillebotte, the same fabulous painter. He's sitting right across the table from Aileen, and he's wearing a singlet. And he's straddling the chair, and he's apparently this fantastic rower. So, he was wealthy, he was a painter, he collected art, and he was, physically fit. You see his muscles. He's got the muscles going. So the figures kind of lean in, they lean out, they're all around each other, these wonderful settings, if you will. There's a lot of glancing and counter-glancing. There's a lot of flirting. There's a lot of people flirting with people that are not looking at them, okay? A wasted flirtation. But there's also this gentle movement in this painting. I've been, obviously, in preparation for this event today, I really dug deeper in terms of the gentle movement. I didn't really notice how, especially with the awning, and there's a breeze, it's almost as though you can feel the breeze and the gentle movement, as you can see with the movement of the awning. rich greens, rich blues, rich oranges. It's wildly colorful. And it really, we can relate to it today because, when we go to the beach or when we go to a pool and just hang out with our friends, life is good, right? And then it's been described as a modern utopia. Okay, here's the big reveal. And who should be in this painting but none other than our man about town, Charles Ephrussi. Now, John Taylor, can you tell which one is Charles Ephrussi?
Oh my gosh, putting him on the spot like that.
Well, he doesn't mind.
Stand up guy with a hat on.
Absolutely. Good. Gold star for dear John Taylor. Yes. That's our man about town, Charles Ephrussi, the only figure who's overdressed in a top hat and formal coat. And he's got to be boiling. And he's painted with his back turned to us. That is terrible. And he's speaking with his personal private secretary, the poet Jules Laforgue. And this leads me to question, why Charles? And why paint him dressed for tea with Princess Mathilde instead of for a boat ride? Is this a backhanded compliment? Am I reading too much into this?
Maybe you always dress that way.
Or is my anti-Semitic radar gone off? Or perhaps we should be grateful to Edmund de Waal because he added his 2 cents to this commentary. Quote, I doubt that Charles wore his Benedictine clothes, heavy and dark, to a boating party in the summer sunshine, a top hat instead of a boater. And he says this is an inside joke, but I don't know. This is Charles again, quote, Renoir suggesting that patrons and critics are needed, but they're needed somewhere in the background, on the edge, even on the sunniest and most liberated of days. Charles is clearly out of place, at least we agree on that, but he is a sitter, a friend, and patron, and he's there. I guess we should be grateful for small favors. Charles Ephrussi, or at least the back of Charles's head, enters art history, end quote. So what we need to remember on this, the day after the night of remembrance, is that de Waal gave Charles Ephrussi a rare gift. Through his research, by returning an important part of Charles's story back to us. And as a result, de Waal helped him reclaim his full place in his art history, not just the footnote that he was as the patron of Renoir, or a background figure in his most famous painting, not to mention his cultural influence. Because the full story of Charles's life and that of the Ephrussi family got lost because of their faith. The truth is that as we honor the memories of the victims of the Holocaust, we are reminded of the millions and millions of stories, in particular, the millions of memories that won't ever be recovered. I mean, millions. It's just mind-boggling. It's hard to even wrap our minds around. So they won't be recovered because they're lost forever. So thank you, Edmund de Waal, for sharing this incredibly moving story, this incredibly moving book, and thank you all for being here today.